Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning. For Wednesday, March 20th, I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Texas game in 163 days, the game against Michigan in 254 days. If you're planning your next event, if it was me, Tony, I would make it unforgettable with Grateful Griddle, Columbus's favorite food truck, serving up smash burgers, gourmet sandwiches, and good vibes. Book your catering today at gratefulgriddleoh.com. Joined by Tony Gerdeman here inside the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. Tony, you just got a chance to watch spring practice number 2 for the Buckeyes, got a chance to talk to the quarterbacks, got a chance to talk to the running backs. There's a lot of stuff to talk about. I'm sure, knowing our audience, as I do, I'm going to guess that the quarterbacks are going to be the first thing they're going to want to hear about. So what did we see from the quarterbacks first before we get to what we heard from the quarterbacks?
Well, again, as Ryan Day said, they're going to roll through, so they're all taking the equal number of reps. I noticed today that sometimes Julian Sayin was going first, sometimes Kienholz was going first during these reps. Watch them do the 1-inch drill, which we talk about every year, where they're throwing over the top of a baseball backstop type fence, and you want to skim it right over, get as close to touching without touching it as you can as you're throwing a pass to a receiver, a staffer standing on the other side. Just that the fence represents an intermediate defender, like dropping back into a zone, a linebacker or something. And so you don't want to loft it because then the safety would break it up, crashing on the receiver. So you want to keep it close. And that Kienholz did a really good job. Was I'd say the most impressive of the three, getting it as close to the fence as possible. And I've got video of that on YouTube that you can check out after watching this if you haven't seen it already.
Yeah, that's always one that is really interesting to watch because it requires this incredible amount of its arm strength, because this is not like you're throwing a 5-yard dump off to a wide receiver. This is generally like 25, 30-yard out. And they're throwing it and they're trying to get it just above that screen, but plenty of times you'll hear the clang and someone is going 1 inch too low or several inches too low. So yeah, that is a Ryan Day staple. I believe that showed up with him in 2017.
That's the first time I saw it.
Yeah, so that is a classic Ryan Day drill. Good to see that one back. That's one we'll see at camps in June as well, with some of the young quarterbacks being here. Speaking of young quarterbacks, before we transition back to the current roster, 2026 quarterback Bo Bentley out of Salina, Texas. He was here today. He was watching stuff very closely. He's a relatively highly rated, I believe he's a top 100 recruit by several of the services. So he was here. There've been a lot of kind of big name recruits here. We saw Micah Champ-Smith, one of the very top offensive line targets here for practice number 1. Deron Parks was here, an offensive line target. He was here for practice 1. But there have been a bunch of those recruits here at practice. Just wanted to kind of mention that at least before we get kind of back to the current, sort of stuff on the table. And, that is this year's quarterbacks. Were you around for Julian Sayin's interview?
Yes, I was over there the entire time.
What did you hear from Julian Sayin?
I wasn't really listening.
No.
A lot of the talk is like, what have you guys learned from Will Howard? How do you implement that kind of leadership? And you have to lead your own way. He said that Will Howard came in and was liked by everybody. And so then I asked, does everybody like you? It's like, well, I'm trying. You do your best. You try to be friendly with everybody, check in on everybody. But then the other question that I was asking the quarterbacks and also Billy Fessler is, Ryan Day has said he wants the quarterbacks to be the toughest guys on the team. How do you do that when nobody can touch you? And a lot of it is just the mental toughness and as Lincoln Kienholz said, of just making the play when the play is there to be made. But Julian Sayin was saying the same thing, even just running through your handoffs, just the mental reps while somebody else is repping, you're back there paying attention to it and just showing that you are always locked in. And Billy Fessler said the same thing. He's like, imagine you're Austin Seerveld watching your tape, but then you're also watching the quarterbacks. And if you look at Julian Sayin, who's not repping, but he's taking mental reps, that's going to trigger in your mind, okay, I can trust this guy. So Julian Sayin, big on the mental aspect of it, which that's Ryan Day being a quarterback is what he's going to tell his quarterbacks they need to worry about. But just being able to handle everything that comes with this. And that was another of the questions, do you understand that if you win this job, all of the eyes that are going to be on you is it kind of comes with the territory from just being a quarterback. But, he said, I saw with Will Howard last year, you saw how the attention, negative, positive, and he also said, but you have to block that out. It's I guess it's okay to look at it when you're the third string quarterback, but when you are the starter, you can't let it impact you in any way. You just got to ignore it.
Well, I think that goes a little bit to something that Lincoln Kienholz said, and there are certain phrases you hear over the years from different guys, and this is probably the first time I heard it from Lincoln Kienholz, but it's something we've heard over the years in this building a bunch, which means it's something they say in this building a bunch, and that is pressure is a privilege. And if you're the starting quarterback at Ohio State, yeah, you're under a ton of pressure. That comes with, being the starting quarterback at Ohio State comes with a lot of benefits, and it comes with a lot of pressure. And that's something that all of these guys, I think everyone has you've seen it with Will Howard, you've seen it with Kyle McCord, you've seen it with C.J. Stroud, you've seen it, all the guys over the years. You're accepting that deal by sort of getting into that competition in the first place. And another thing we've heard a lot this spring is Ohio State isn't for everyone. That one, that's a new one. That one I have not heard in previous seasons. But, that's not them saying, get out, we don't want you in the transfer portal. That's them saying, there is an expectation here. The expectation is not just going to change because you don't want to live up to the expectation or you can't live up to the expectation. The expectation is the expectation. If that's not for you, that's fine. Ohio State isn't for everyone. That was another thing that Lincoln Kienholz talked about.
Billy Fessler said it as well. They sussed that out in recruiting. When he was asked, do you feel like you've got three quarterbacks that can start at Ohio State in terms of handling all of this? And so yeah, I think so. You deal with that in recruiting, and you can tell pretty quickly, or even eventually, the guys who are I don't know that they can handle the pressure, because over the past, say, 10, 12 years at Ohio State, about the only quarterback that didn't receive some really harsh criticism was maybe Justin Fields. And maybe Dwayne Haskins, because he was only here for a year. But C.J. Stroud was not well liked.
You apparently
for a while.
Don't remember Justin Field or Dwayne Haskins trying to run the ball or not running the ball.
No,
so.
That is correct. But Justin Fields kind of got out of here because he beat Michigan once and didn't get to play them a second time. None of the playoff losses were, I would say, his fault. But C.J. Stroud struggling against Oregon as a redshirt freshman, not beating there was plenty of criticism to where his relationship with the fans was not always great. And Will Howard, with a couple of mistakes he would make per in a game, and not always great, but eventually becomes well loved. JT Barrett, was one of the all-time greats, but also somebody that could only get them so far and would anger people. So you can be one of the all-time greats and still receive plenty of criticism, and it's a lot to handle.
Yeah, it is a lot to handle, but as we said, a lot comes with that. And someone who is just sort of starting that process is Tavien St. Clair, and he has a little bit more of a head start even than a lot of the other freshmen, because he's been around this building so much. We saw him, I think, literally every game the last couple of years. We saw him at practices. You would see him at, he would be around the building. Anytime you were around the building, you felt like you saw Tavien St. Clair. And he's gotten, he talked about the fact that is a little bit of a head start, just learning the culture, being able to see what last year's team really went through, and that's a benefit a lot of these freshmen got when, they went to the Rose Bowl, they went to the Cotton Bowl, but they were at these practices too, where you saw it wasn't just, oh, look, we're standing here and we're in the confetti and we get pictures and it's what a fun time. It's no, they saw all the stuff that led up to that, and that's a really, really big part of that, and that's helped a lot of these guys sort of adjust to the Ohio State expectations and the Ohio State culture, I think, a little quicker. Tavien talked about the fact that because he's been around so much even before that, he was able to sort of be a little bit of a leader within his class to sort of tell guys oh yeah, this is where this is in the building, because he's he's your David Lee Roth with the was it Your Guide on the hat in the California Girls video. That wasn't Tavien's exact way he explained it, but that is basically.
Do you have any more recent references?
No, but thank you for asking. He was another one who said it's going to be hard. Ohio State is not for everyone. But it's, he said he talked to Julian Sayin a little bit about what his transition was like last year, and it sounds like Tavien feels like his transition to Ohio State has probably been a little bit smoother than Julian Sayin's, because Julian Sayin literally started at a different school and then transferred to Ohio State. Julian Sayin started that acclimation process at Alabama and then transferred to Ohio State. So, he could, if any of these Ohio State players want a tour of the Alabama building, Julian Sayin could probably help them with that. But, and
probably not anymore, though.
Probably not anymore. His thumbprint may not work on the system now. But it's something where, obviously now Julian Sayin is taking a leadership role. Lincoln Kienholz talked about the fact that that's the area where he's grown the most is in leadership. He was also asked about being the oldest guy in the room, and he said it is weird. It just goes by so quickly because he just got here in the summer of 2023, and now he's the old head in that room. And that's, I mean, the summer of 2023 was not that long ago, and he was the young, inexperienced guy who really unfairly got thrown into that Cotton Bowl, and that was only like a little over 1 year ago. That was like 14 months ago, 15 months ago. And now he's the old guy in the room. So that was a little weird, I think, for him as well. Anything else on the quarterback?
Yeah, when we do these things, like you can watch the players grow in terms of how they interview. And Lincoln Kienholz would be previously just, like how like the voice will warble a little bit when they're not used to doing this. Like there's no warbling anymore. Like he's a very confident and composed quarterback, and it's because of being the oldest guy in the room, being around. This is nothing new. So like this does, not that it should faze them, but there are players who come out here and there's a little nerves to them, and there's no nerves anymore with them, which is interesting.
Well, and it's funny because you see this. It's like this annual cycle, and as Tavien St. Clair was up there talking, one of the freshman defensive linemen was standing right next to me and was just kind of like watching and like, okay, what's this like? How does this work? And one of the SIDs came up to him and was sort of like talking to him a little bit about like, okay, here's what to expect and here's how this works, because we'll get the defensive lineman in a little bit. So, but it wasn't that long ago that we were having this conversation with Jack Sawyer in the spring, and then JT Tuimoloau showed up in the summer, and and it was like, oh, look at these new guys. And before that, it was like, oh, Chase Young, well, he's bigger than I thought, but he's just a freshman. And like, it does go quick, as everyone seems to say. On to the running backs. I'll start with C.J. Donaldson. C.J. Donaldson, transfer from West Virginia. He got to Ohio State at 243 pounds and basically said, Coach Mick looked at him and just was like, no. Nuh-uh. And said he's lost 18 pounds already, so he's down to 225. Sounds like that's probably about where he's going to play. But said he feels a lot faster. They wanted him to have more explosive, have more short area burst. Feels like he's got that. He is pretty solidly built. I have some photos that I've thrown up on our huddle board at presented by Jeff Ruby's Columbus at BuckeyeHuddle.com. He said, he wasn't promised anything here. Like, you weren't promised anything for your job. He wasn't promised anything to come here. He also said, he knows this could be his last year of football. That's why he's really focused, because he said there's nothing promised past this year, where you could go to the NFL. Not everyone goes to the NFL. So, nothing promised to get him here, nothing promised past this year. He said that Tywone Malone has really helped him out as a transfer, just in terms of, which I thought, I don't think he's from Jersey, and he's not. Tywone Malone is a New Jersey guy. C.J. Donaldson is a Miami guy. I was like, where would they have known each other from? But
baseball?
I don't think so. But he said Tywone Malone has been really helpful just in terms of, sort of getting him acclimated in terms of like, so you might have done some things differently at your previous school. He's like, we don't do that here, basically. So there was a lot of that. He also said he was working on the sled during workouts, and said James Peoples was like kicking his butt on the sled during workouts, and was like trying to help him and encourage him and all that kind of stuff. But I thought that was, with expectations being as high as they are for James Peoples, and him just being a second-year guy, and C.J. Donaldson having been already a relatively high-level college back, I thought that was like all right, file that one away. Yeah,
that's like the welcome to Ohio State. This is what's going to happen. And so, he said a little bit about how James Peoples was pushing him, and I thought that was interesting that you've got a guy who is now a senior being pushed by the sophomore and realizing, I've got to kick it up a notch. I talked with Sam Williams-Dixon, and it was pretty fascinating because, he's a guy that went into the portal and then came back. And when his answer, when he was asked, like, why did you go? And he said, me listening to the wrong people. And he said,
Name them.
And then he also said, I didn't want to leave. And so I asked him, like, what is it tough when you've got people in your ear telling you to go? And he's like, it was basically peers telling him to go. And I'm not like James Peoples, like, what you ought to do. No, not like that.
Yeah.
But just friends, basically, I would assume. And so he said he wanted to come back. He didn't really have like a tremendous relationship with Carlos Loughlin. Not that it was bad. it's just they didn't talk much. And I said, well, was that like whose fault is that? And he's like, I was like, did you have to be more aggressive? He's like, yeah, it was on me because I'm not a guy that talks a lot, so I had to be much more forthcoming and aggressive in seeking out the coaching and the relationship. And he said it's really taken off, and he's pretty happy. He kept talking about how I had to grow up, and so that's a common refrain from a lot of true freshmen who come to Ohio State or go anywhere. You know, you got to grow up. That's what the freshman year is for a lot of us. Sophomore. And
Kevin's over there. You gestured in the wrong direction. Isaiah West, speaking of true freshmen, he has had to adjust to not being on the field right now. He talked about the fact that he's just, I don't think this is, didn't sound like this is like season ending or anything, but just banged up right now and not out there. He said that's been very tough to just watch these guys and you're on the sideline because I'm sure, mental reps only go so far with all of this stuff, and to be missing things, you graduated high school early, you left your high school friends early, you came here, and and the whole point was you're going to get a little bit of a leg up, and now the leg up is not quite as big as it might have otherwise been. So that I think was difficult, probably a little bit difficult for him as an adjustment. He did say it just blew him away to be with the team throughout the playoff run, and that was such an important thing. He said his biggest takeaway from that, I thought this was an interesting one, a player-led team is going to beat a coach-led team every time. I thought that was an interesting
that's interesting
takeaway. And, that was a very player-led team, and, that goes back to the meetings after the Michigan game, the well-documented meetings after the Michigan game and all that kind of stuff. And, but I think that's an interesting lesson, and it's certainly something that, when they talk about the culture in the building, that's a big part of it, is that it's not just, listening to the coach and saying, okay, and doing it. The players have to be the leaders, and the players have to, you don't go out and you get to the building at 6 a.m. because the coach has told you to do it. You get there because Marvin Harrison is there and he's got the key for the lights, and you turn on the lights. We saw after practice, there are guys out there working, continuing to work after practice. That's a standard thing here, and and it's not just the true freshmen. We saw true freshmen out there, but it's also Caleb Downs is out there. Jeremiah Smith is out there. If Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs are out there practicing a little bit more, everyone could probably use a little more practice.
It was interesting during the practice watching the vets. Like Brandon Ennis was coaching up Phillip Bell on blocking. He was coaching up and just keeping an eye on like Dazee Jones running routes, just like being that leader. But it is the idea that these freshmen saw what it took and saw it happen. Like a lot of times you get concerned, like the freshmen come in after a national championship and think, well, it just happens, and they got to see that it doesn't just happen. And so that's always where that's the culture thing, where you've got to see, like, they got to see how the sausage is made. It doesn't just show up on the McMuffin. Like they got to really get in there and you got to take the hatchet to some hogs, basically.
Speaking of knowledge.
Speaking of segues,
Isaiah West said that Coach Lachlan told him, make knowledge your best talent. That's a lot of the detail stuff. And that was something that Tavien St. talked about. Tavien St. talked about the fact that in high school, they didn't run under center stuff. They really just ran stuff out of shotgun. So there's little just very minute technique kind of stuff with taking a snap from under center that they're working with. But that's all the stuff. It's the blocking. It's the hand placement in the blocking. It's the hand fighting with the defensive line. But that's the little stuff that you're not talking about on the broadcast on Saturdays. But it's the little stuff that makes a big difference, and that's the stuff that these veterans are kind of trying to emphasize. One last thing for Isaiah West, he talked about Maxwell Roy, defensive lineman. They're from the same high school. They're both from St. Joseph's Prep, which has been a school that has brought a lot of folks to Ohio State over the years. Kyle McCord, Marvin Harrison, Jim Knowles. Am I missing anyone? I feel like I'm missing one more.
You might be.
Jeremiah Trotter, but he didn't go to Ohio State. But there were, that is a high school that's produced a lot of talent over the years. He talked about the fact that, as kids, they talked about maybe we'll go play in college together. And, how often does, the package deal sort of fall apart in recruiting? But they did end up coming to the same place. Anyone else that you had?
No, we've covered it because, again, I stayed with Julian Sayin, stayed with Billy Fessler, and it was a good day. plenty of stuff, and of course you can check that out. Tom, they can find that talking all about it at BuckeyeHuddle.com, on the YouTube, on the podcasts. Go ahead and...
Yeah. We'll have through the course of the day and probably into the night, we'll have interviews, like the full interviews with these guys. We have a bunch of that stuff already up for our members at BuckeyeHuddle.com on the Huddle board, presented by Jeff Ruby's Columbus. I put the Tavien St. Clair interview up first because I know that's one that people are probably going to be very interested in, but we have a bunch of others already up there as well. And then photos, all sorts of, Tony has a full practice report there, all that stuff, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. We hope to see you there. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.